I read that right. Adam from England, who says a contingency argument for a necessary entity. So let's get the first call going. Let's see if you can connect. There we go. Adam, can you hear us?
Yes.
Welcome in. Adam, can you... Oh, you good?
There was just a bit of a delay. Hello, Ian. Hello, Justin.
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead and lay out the argument? Or I'm sorry.
Yeah. Can you put some legs behind the argument for us?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to argue that it's an impossibility that all entities in reality are contingent, where contingency means conditional dependency between entities, objects, and relationships. So that being an impossibility implies that reality has to have a non-contingent member, and when we deduce that entity's properties, it has the properties of God. So should I give the like a description of the syllogism?
Sure. Well, I guess I have like some preliminary thoughts. So I might agree that there's some sort of like necessary foundation. If by necessary foundation, all we mean is like something that exists in all possible worlds. But I might just say that the necessary foundation is either the universe itself or like the laws of nature, something of that sort, not like a thing that has like a mind.
Okay. Well, if that is granted, I'd just say that the universe is characterized by specific laws with specific values and specific mathematical structures, but those have mathematically consistent alternatives, and that implies that they're actually the member of an infinite set. So there's a contingency or a dependency relation between those two things. And when we look at what kind of thing can select or ground that kind of specific information, the specific laws, the mathematical structures that the universe exhibits, we find that what can do that is actually a mind.
Why should I believe that there was ever a point in time where these things were selected? But maybe even like a better question is, do you think God was eternally willing the laws of nature into existence?
Well, eternal to me means time independent. Yes, I think that time is relational. So on the output of that will, that would be sort of the first term or the first point of the universe, and that would then be a temporal relation between the universe and God.
So God was eternally willing the universe into existence, or eternally willing the laws of nature into existence? Okay,
so God is time independent. We can say that God was always willing the universe, the laws of the universe into existence, but always means across all of the time points.
Then they would have just always existed.
I think that conflates always existing with time independence, right? So if time is relational, then if it's just like a relation between the points, then it can be the case that God is willing the temporal sequence of the universe into existence across the entire sequence, but it's not the case that the universe is also time independent.
So if it's the case that God was always willing the laws of nature into existence, and God willing something is sufficient for it existing, then presumably the laws of nature would have just always existed.
Well, I don't think that follows, but you have to distinguish between two things. So time is relational. So time arises upon the creation of the first time point. But what you said there was always, but always just means across the entire set of temporal points. But the temporal points are what the universe consists of.
Would you say
just for God to be eternal?
Maybe the word always is a bit of a misnomer for us, right? So would you say God is eternal? Would you say that he always existed? I guess how would you describe God?
Okay, so I'd describe God as a non-contingent entity. So if it's non-contingent, it's independent, and that includes independence of time. So something can be independent of time.
Would you say it's eternal?
Yeah, so time independence is eternity, is what I mean by eternity.
Okay, so was God eternally willing the laws of nature into existence?
Yeah.
Then the laws of nature would just be eternal.
No, because when the output of that will is like a point, right? So God's grounding something, but time is relational, right? So time arises upon the creation of the first time point. And so yes, you can say that God is willing the universe across the entire sequence of points, but that entire sequence is a finite set.
That just doesn't make any sense to me. I think I'm just going to need you to like reject a premise in the syllogism. So I might say like premise 1, God was eternally willing the laws of nature into existence. Premise 2, God willing something is sufficient for it to exist. And then conclusion, the laws of nature are going to be eternal.
Well, so the laws of nature exist across a set of time points, right? So like,
Do you reject premise 1 or premise 2 though?
I don't reject either. I think that what's happening is like kind of like a conflation as to what's true for the universe and what's true for God. So like God's time independent. God can create a sequence of events that are themselves temporal, so over which the laws of the universe distribute. The laws of the universe would distribute over those time points, but that wouldn't make them. That wouldn't mean that they are sort of infinite in terms of a sequence of points.
Respectfully, that's like, this is kind of the point of logic, is that you can't accept the premises and then reject the conclusion. This would be like if you said, yes, I agree that Socrates is a man, and yes, I agree that all men are mortal, but all this Socrates is mortal business, I'm not too sure. Like, I just don't think that it's consistent to accept the premises and then reject the conclusion.
Could you restate the conclusion?
Yeah, the laws of nature are eternal. Their existence is eternal.
Okay. I mean, I regard the laws of logic and mathematics to be eternal, but the laws of physics I regard to be the what is responsible for the universe as a finitely temporal sequence of events. So I would regard those as existing over a finite period of time.
And my argument is demonstrating to you why the exact opposite is true, why that actually can't be the case at all. You know, if God was eternally willing the laws of physics into existence, and God willing something into existence is sufficient for it to exist, then the conclusion to that is just going to be that the laws of physics would have eternally existed.
I think that what's occurring there is like kind of like a conflation between something which is created and something which is independent. Right? So in P1, the subject of eternal is God, but God is independent. Whereas in the conclusion, the subject of eternal is laws, but the laws are created. And what I'm saying is that time is relational. So if time is relational, the created thing is either an nth term or a first term of some kind of temporal sequence, because it's something that's being grounded by the independent thing.
I feel like that just doesn't work around like the fact that it just logically follows via a valid inference that the laws of physics would have been eternal. But maybe another way I can approach this is like this. Prior to God creating the laws of physics, did God believe that he created the laws of physics?
I don't think there's any prior to, because if prior to is temporal, I don't think that the temporal sequence is not an external metric to what is true inside the universe.
Well, so if there's no point prior to the laws of physics existing, then that means that there's no point where it was just God existing alone.
Yeah, I think you can say that.
Then I guess I'm just like completely confused about your theology. You don't think there was ever any state of existence where God existed without the universe. But if God's eternal, that just means that the universe is eternal.
Yeah. So for God to for there to be no point where the universe didn't exist without God, that just means that across the entire set of temporal points, God is true across the entire set, right? So God is willing the universe into existence across the entire sequence of temporal points that are inside the universe. But what I'm saying is that for God to be eternal means that God is time independent. So what I'm trying to distinguish between the temporal sequence in the universe and eternity. So where eternity just means time independent. Do you feel me?
No, not really. Do you agree that causes precede their effects?
Yeah, in space and time, yeah.
But just like overall, right? Like presumably God's exist. If God is the cause of the universe, maybe that's a good question. Do you think God is the cause of the universe?
Yeah, I think that is a good question, because I wouldn't say it's the cause, right? Because I regard cause to be spatial and temporal. But what I'm offering is a contingency argument. So I'd say that the universe is contingent on God.
So then it just sounds like God didn't create the universe.
That's what I heard.
Well, no, the universe is dependent. So the universe is the output of a function. So that, God's.
I mean, it is caused by the function.
The universe is a function.
Because you just said it wasn't caused.
A cause is a function that's restricted to space and time.
Okay, so it can't be the output of a function if it's not caused.
No, you can have contingency. You can have dependency is a function. Because dependency is just a relationship between not just objects in space, but it's between objects and the laws, or like the kind of abstract mathematical facts that are required for something to be true. So, for example, for objects to not be able to interact with each other so that they travel faster than light, that is dependent on an abstraction that's true everywhere. So, like the Lorentz, the Lorentz factor or whatever it is.
Do you agree that God's not the creator of the universe?
So I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
Yeah, I apologize, but would you agree that God isn't the creator of the universe under your version of theology?
No, so creation would be like a dependency relation.
I take creation to be like when you cause something to come into existence. That to me is what creation means.
Maybe we're using different definitions. I have the same definition as Ian.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. So I think it's important to distinguish between causation and contingency. So like I was saying before,
was there a moment where the universe didn't exist?
A moment would be a moment of time, right?
However you want to define it. Was there a state at which the universe did not exist?
It's quite difficult to answer. I'd go with no, because there's the universe.
So the universe always existed.
Well, no, because
sounds to me like you just nullified the need for your God.
Yeah.
No, so what I'm saying is that there's not a moment where the universe doesn't exist, because the temporal sequence is grounded by God's action.
You can call it a state or a moment. Was there a state in which the universe didn't exist?
Yep.
When
God was taking the action, did the universe exist?
Is it okay if I just answer Justin's question? So like,
go for it.
If by state you mean like a logical state, as in like a truth value of some kind of proposition, then I would say yes.
Okay.
Wait, so there was a state where it didn't exist?
Did the state where it didn't exist precede the state where it did exist?
There wouldn't be like preceding as a temporal notion. No.
So then the state of non-existence was also simultaneously the state of existence, which is a direct contradiction as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
It's not that it would be a contradiction. It'd be atemporal or time independent.
Listen, I'm not great
time.
at classical logic, but I'm pretty sure you can't exist and not exist at the same time.
Yeah, that is. It's just a direct contradiction.
Yeah, but what you're missing is that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there would be. It's to do with dependency, right? So that there could be a state. It could be the case that the universe isn't created, but the universe creation is still dependent on God. That's what I'm saying.
So would you agree that in this state, the universe both existed and didn't exist?
It's in superposition.
The universe is in superposition?
Like it could be otherwise. Right, so it's that it could be otherwise, right?
But why would we do that? Come on. There's no need to like dip into like quantum stuff. That's like what we're actually looking for is that it's a contradiction, right? Like, let's be honest. It's not in superposition. If it exists and doesn't exist, well, that's just a contradiction, a violation of like fundamental laws of logic.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it does exist in that state, right? So if God hasn't grounded it, then it doesn't exist at that point.
But it would both exist and not exist, unless I'm misunderstanding.
No, I'm not saying that it does. I'm not saying that in that state that it does exist. I'm just saying that it doesn't exist until God grounds it. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, wait. So in this state, does God believe that the universe exists?
No, until He grounds it, it doesn't.
Okay, so then God changes. He goes from not believing that it exists to believing that it exists.
Yeah, once He's grounded it, He does. Yeah.
Then God can't be outside of time, because if you're outside of time, you don't have future states. But if God changes, if He goes from not believing that the universe exists to believing that the universe exists, then that's just a change.
Okay, so God can't be outside of time if He changes, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anything can be outside of time, because
True.
If things are outside of time and it prohibits things from changing, then whatever state that existed outside of time would just always and forever eternally be that state. But since that state doesn't exist, we must conclude that there's no such thing as outside of time.
Okay, so I think that the reply that both of you gave kind of presupposes that change requires time. But what I was kind of explaining at the beginning entails things the other way around, right? So it's that creation, like an act of creation, can ground a temporal sequence. So, like what I was saying before was that God is time independent, but time is relational. So if God creates like a first point, like let's call it like an A, right? So if God creates A, where A is the initial state of the universe, the temporal relation arises once that A is created. So it's a relation between God and A. That would be the temporal relation. So it's not that creation requires progression.
Inside of time or outside of time, because you can't have a temporal relationship outside of time.
No, what I'm saying is that the temporal relationship is created upon God's action, right? But God is time independent. That's what I'm saying.
So there's no relationship then between point A and God.
There is. It's dependency. Right? So God creates an A, and then once time is relational. So then once God creates A,
can you define what dependency is?
God
because it sounds to me like you're using a word that you think has meaning and it really doesn't in the real world. So what does it mean to be dependent?
It means that the truth value only obtains under certain conditions, under the conditions of the thing that's dependent on. So one causes the other thing to be true? Well, you're saying causation, and right, contingency is not about causation. It's from formal logic. It's like looking at the truth conditions of a statement. So what causes something to be true? If it's using causing again, but it's if its conditions are true. Like if its truth conditions are true, then something's true.
I would say, yeah. If the truth conditions of something are true, that it's true. I would connect those dots too. Yeah. But you see, like the kind of weird, like gymnastics you have to do to get around trying to say that God doesn't cause creation.
No, it just requires me to distinguish between causation and dependency. Because I think that causation just happens in space, right? Causation is something that we see happening only in space-time, and obviously that's going to present problems for explaining things like logic, mathematics, those sort of things that aren't caused. They don't stand in causal relation to anything.
So, in terms of, do you think that things outside of time don't experience a past or a future?
No. So I think God is time independent, but I think that he can observe temporal sequences within the universe.
So, I guess, like, what does being outside of time even mean then? If a thing that's outside of time can have a past and a future, I guess I just have no idea what it would even mean to be outside of time.
Okay, well, remember I didn't say outside of time, right? Because like outside, in the conventional way that we use it, means not inside, right? But in set theory, it's not how it's used. Like there's this notion of inclusive like outside. So if you have a set A and you have a subset B, A is outside of B, but everywhere where B is, A also is. So I just want to make
like a subset,
that
or
clear. So what? Pardon me?
like a subset?
Yeah. So I would say that the universe is a subset of God, right? So God is omnipresent. So God represents the whole of reality.
Do you think God is just a
So the
set?
universe, yeah, well, you can represent God that way.
Sets don't have minds, though.
Yeah, so I'm just saying it's a representation. So if we're making statements about what is inside, what is outside, things like functions, right? Because functions part of set theory, you can represent God as a set, but it just doesn't capture everything. That's all I mean there.
So you said that the universe is a subset of God, that the universe is like, would you say that the universe just is God?
Well, no, because like I said before, so like the universe is defined by specific laws, right? So there's these laws of physics, which are just like a subset of mathematical possibility. Like there's kind of other mathematical structures that we don't see in our universe. But all of those other possibilities, they're all mathematically consistent, right? They're not untrue. So I'd say that God has more functionality than the universe has. The universe is like a restriction of what's possible.
So I feel like if you're saying that the universe is a subset of God, you are committing yourself to saying that the universe is God, in the same way that we would say like the set 1, 2, 3, 4 is a subset of all of the numbers. We would say that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are numbers, that this set is like a set of numbers. So we would be like a set of God. You know, the universe is just like part of God at that point.
Yeah.
I feel like,
yeah.
well, I don't know. Do you hold to like divine simplicity? Because this is like catastrophic for divine simplicity.
I do, in a sense. Yeah, I don't think it's catastrophic.
Because if we're part of God, then that means God is parts.
Yeah. So God, like as a mathematical structure, yeah, God has parts.
Okay, then you would just reject divine simplicity.
I don't see why. So to me, simplicity just means that it's described by relatively few properties. It's like an object that's moving around in space is not simple, obviously, because it has lots of properties. But God, in my view, compared to everything else, God has relatively few properties.
Well, that's just not how anybody in the literature uses like divine simplicity. I've heard like two formulations, which is either like God doesn't have parts, or equivalently that God's essence is identical to his existence. Either way, under
Okay,
like any standard reading of divine simplicity, this would just be like a direct contradiction, absent like affirming things that are like really bizarre. Like, I don't know, if God doesn't have, or if his essence is identical to his existence, and his essence includes like the entire universe, then that means that we're all like, our existence is identical to one another's. So my existence is identical to your existence. And I certainly don't think you want to say that.
No, I think what is probably missing from your critique there is that things can be hierarchically organized. So we can all be a part of God. We can all form parts of God's identity or God's essence, if you want to say that. Right, because we're all dependent on God. We're a part of God as a mathematical structure, but we're not identical to each other. Because there's like a there's like a hierarchy of identity, and you can see that in terms of functionality as well. So we're all made out of matter and energy, but
are God's parts
we're all
necessary?
different. You're a bit muffled there. Could you repeat that, please?
Are God's parts necessary?
No.
Oh, well, then God isn't a necessary being.
I don't see how that follows. So God's identity is what's non-contingent or necessary, but God can create things that are dependent on him.
So if God has contingent parts, then God himself cannot be a purely necessary being because some of his parts are contingent.
Okay, so by parts, I guess you mean like composition that's supporting. You kind of mean the parts are supporting the structure, like the parts of a car, right? So you're thinking of things in terms of composition.
You're saying that we're all a part of God, but you also want to say that each of our existence is contingent, right? Like, my parents could have easily failed to create me, or like a million other things. So my existence right now is contingent. If I am a part of God, then that means that God is not fully necessary, because part of God, namely me, you, Justin, everyone, we're all contingent. So part of God is contingent, so God's not fully necessary.
I think if you think of things in terms of set theory, right? So if you have a set, like if you have a superset S, and then you've got like these subsets A, B, and C, the superset can exist without the subsets. So A, B, and C are all a part of S, but S has it has relations, like sets are defined by relations typically, or their properties. Those can exist without any of their subsets, even though their subsets inherit the properties of the set by virtue of being subsets. Is that too abstract, or should I?
So I follow along. I just don't think any of that helps you.
No. Let me ask you a question, Adam. What God do you believe in that forces you to contort yourself into these gymnastic pretzels to define his existence or her existence?
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, I don't agree with your characterization, but I'm a Catholic.
Right. Yeah. So you believe in the Trinity?
I don't have an argument for the Trinity.
I'm just asking you, do you believe in the Trinity?
I accept it on faith. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so then prior to the creation of the universe, and maybe I'm wrong, the universe was at one point somehow created out of nothing, right?
I would say, out of nothing physical. I'd say it was created out of God.
Fair enough. Prior to the creation of the universe, it would have just been the Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yep.
Yeah. Could the Father and the Son have a conversation with each other?
I don't know. I think that there's a conversation is basically just an exchange of information. The information doesn't have to be physical. So I think I'd go with yes.
Okay. Do we conclude that a conversation, though, is a series of, at a minimum, thoughts?
Yeah.
Does that not require time?
Well, it creates time. Right? So time is a relation between
so
the
every
inputs
time
and
the
outputs
Father and the Son share a thought, they create a moment of time.
Yeah, they experience it as time.
What's more parsimonious, that every time God wants to do something, he creates an instance of time, or that time just always existed?
It's when God grounds something, like, a statement or some kind of output information, then that creates a relation, right? And the time is relational.
Is are all of God's parts good?
So the things that come purely from God, yeah.
But there are parts of God that are not good, because I take like being all good. If God has parts and God is all good, then presumably each and every part of God would be good. But if every part of the universe is a part of God, then that means that you're kind of left defending that everything in the universe is good.
Well, I think that just comes down to what identities are. Right? So each part is an identity, right? And each identity, like, so if something is bad, then the predicate bad is just indexed to that particular identity. It's not indexed to God as a whole.
Wait,
right? So something can be true of a subset B, but it's not true of the superset S. That can happen.
But if the superset S is like the superset characterized by having like being like all something, right? Like if the superset is like the superset of all even numbers, then each subset is also going to be defined by being like even numbers, right? You're not going to find a 3 in any subset of the set of all even numbers. So likewise, if God is all good, then presumably every subset of his parts, of his property, are likewise going to be all good.
Yeah, that would be true, but I think that good and bad are subject to free will.
But then that's just going to be a problem, right? So you're going to say that, for example, I don't know. Let's go for the throat. Is the Holocaust a part of God?
It's inside God.
Okay, and are all of God's parts good?
No.
Okay, then God's not all good.
Cool. I guess you can throw omnibenevolence right out the window.
Well, no, because the predicate of goodness, it's not attributed to every, like, if it's not attributed to some of the parts, right? So if some of the parts are good and some are bad, that doesn't mean that the the identity that contains all of them, that can still be all good, right? It's not like composition. Do you see what I'm saying?
No. Likewise,
okay,
if the superset was like the set of all even numbers, none of the subsets are going to contain odd numbers. If the superset is all good, then none of the subsets are going to be not all good. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the superset.
Okay, but then there are going to be restrictions of what the what the superset has. I mean, there's like privation theory of evil, right? So where it's like evil is more like the negation of good, like it's what is absent.
But isn't God going to be equivalent to good? If something is literally a part of God, then how is it a privation of God?
That would be the predicate. Right? So if something's a part of God, that the part is the set, yeah. But the functions that the set engages in, they're just like a restriction of what the superset is capable of.
Can something be a part of God and also a privation of God?
Well, it's not the thing itself that is a privation. It's what it does, right? It's the function that it implements. That's the
I don't know.
Privation.
So in like the case of littering, I don't know. Is littering a part of God?
It takes place inside God. It takes place inside reality, which is what I'm calling God.
And God must have a lot of trash in him.
Yeah.
But so it takes place in reality, it takes place in God. I mean, presumably we agree that littering is bad. So then there's like a bad thing within God.
Yeah, but remember, what's true of one of the parts, like so one of the sub-identities, whatever you want to call it, that predicate doesn't have to be attributed to the omnipresent identity, because they're different identities. Even though one is a part of the other, they're distinct, right?
So I mean, I guess would you agree that an all good being, within an all good being, all of his parts are going to be good?
No, I don't. I think it's up to depending on conditions.
I guess I just don't, I completely don't share those intuitions. That to me seems like very obvious that an all good being, all of his parts would be good as well.
Yeah, but this would be like if I said I was an all good person, but then I strangled somebody last week. Well, listen, I'm not all good if I strangled somebody last week. Like, you can't have parts of you that are bad and then claim to be all good.
Yeah, but that's because you're talking about yourself. You are just one identity. So of course you're not going to have like if you enact bad actions, then that reflects badly on you. But what we're talking about is whether people's bad actions are like create like a transitive property onto God, right? So that's not transitive.
I don't think it's just people's bad actions. I think, we can take a look at what your God does and judge that as bad. Like, presumably you believe that God created natural disasters and bone cancer and skin cancer and things like that. You don't think those are good things, do you?
I don't think they're either good or bad, because they're not intents or actions. They're just events.
Yeah, but did something cause those events to be possible?
Yeah, to be possible, yeah.
Right, yeah. So God created the earth in a way in which natural disasters would be part of it. Could he have created the earth without the natural disasters?
Well, not in the way that it exists, because the disasters are...
That wasn't my question, though. My question is, could he do it? Could he create a world with no natural disasters?
Not that I know of.
So he's not all powerful either?
Yeah.
You're making your God weaker and weaker every time we pry open the next layer.
No, I don't think it's an issue of making him not all powerful. The point is that God, right, natural disasters serve a purpose. The purpose is that it's all a part of kind of renewing the environment. So God created a world that renews
anything
itself.
About purpose. I asked you about his ability.
Well, how does
it doesn't matter.
How does like the wholesale slaughter of innocents like renew the environment? Could God renew the environment without taking the lives of like 200,000 people a year?
Well, it's dependent on us to avoid it, right? What we're just talking about is the existence of the natural disasters. At the moment, we're just talking about the existence of the natural disasters. And whether
How
or not
does
God
the island of Haiti
without...
avoid the earthquake that killed 200,000 people?
Yeah, what should they have done?
They can build. Well, if we had high enough IQ, we could just build buildings that don't collapse under earthquakes, like they have in some parts of Japan or whatever.
Then why didn't God just give us like a way higher IQ?
Yeah.
Sorry, pardon me.
And why didn't if us surviving is contingent on us having all of us being like super geniuses, why didn't God just give all of us like a 220 IQ?
Well, because it's our responsibility to create those conditions. Like we're an evolved species. I'm just saying
create like the high IQ. I'm confused.
People die in earthquakes that aren't in large buildings, right?
Right. I didn't understand that. Sorry.
People get injured in earthquakes that aren't living in large buildings or near large buildings, right? People have been dying in earthquakes since before we could make buildings.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not a good argument. Just saying that the goal of humanity is to avoid doing things that would exacerbate the damage. The reality is there's nothing humanity can do that would completely allow them to avoid the natural disasters. But it's also irrelevant because, like, if I took a flamethrower and set it up in my living room with a bunch of babies in there, I'm like, listen, avoid the flamethrower. Well, listen, I'm the idiot for putting a flamethrower in a living room full of babies. It doesn't matter if the babies didn't have enough wherewithal to avoid the flamethrower. The fact that the flamethrower exists is the problem. So the fact that these natural disasters exist and that for the most part they're unavoidable is the problem.
Okay, but with the example that you gave is one where you're deliberately doing that, and that's the only thing that achieves is killing those people, right? So what I'm trying to explain is the omnipotence. No. Like, I don't think that natural disasters...
It renews the earth. The ashes from the dead babies go in my garden.
Yeah, well, let's say the flamethrower is like, it's roasting some hot dogs on the barbecue. Then you're just saying, hey, babies have a high enough IQ to not get incinerated, and then they do. I just don't think the police are going to take you very seriously when you give the explanation, well, actually, it was the babies who needed to be wise enough to avoid it.
Yeah, like the better result would be not to have the natural disasters. That's the thing you should do, is design the thing without the horrific part.
Yeah, but then you can only do that by avoiding the causes of the disasters. But the causes of the disasters are like the laws of physics that allow for planets that have, tectonic plates on them that renew, that where the Earth's crust being renewed.
And who created the laws of physics?
Pardon me?
Who created laws of physics? Who decided what the laws of physics would do?
Yeah, I'm saying it's God.
Okay, so God could create different laws of physics that allow natural disasters to not be needed. He's in charge of everything in your worldview. Well, he can do whatever physics he wants.
Yeah, but the laws of physics have consequences, right? So
right, but he said them.
Physics has consequences.
Does God have suspend God suspends the laws of physics in your theology all the time, right? He suspended the laws of physics to revive Jesus from the dead, for Jesus to walk on water. God suspends the laws of physics presumably all the time, especially if you think that he intervenes to fulfill prayers when people pray, like, God, please, like, don't let my kid get like killed by cancer or whatever. God intervenes all the time. So couldn't God just intervene to prevent earthquakes or to save the lives of people? When the rubble is falling, God intervenes to just move it out of the way of people, or better yet, he intervenes to make it such that there aren't these earthquakes or that we don't feel the effects of them. Couldn't God just do that?
I think that he probably does do that in some places, but whether or not he's going to do it for you probably depends on his relationship with you. Like,
well, he did save that Bible one time in the wildfires, if you don't remember that. So maybe that's what he's talking about.
But I mean, in all good God, like, if we're evaluating goodness, I don't think a good individual is just going to do things that helps the people that they're in like a close relationship with. I think that a good person would help people regardless. I don't think that like an all good firefighter wouldn't just be in there saving like the people who he knows and likes. He would be saving everybody. So likewise, I don't think that it makes sense to say that God, an all good God, is just saving the people who he has like a close relationship with.
But it might not just be the people that he has a close relationship with. It might just also be people who ask or who have some kind of intent. He might just be reading their intents and just deciding who is going to live longer and who isn't based on their intent. It could just be like that.
So just to be clear, we can know for certainty under this view that whenever we watch the news and we find out that somebody died in an earthquake, like you would say that the hundreds of thousands of people who died in like the Haiti earthquake, that these people must have just had bad intent.
Well, no, it's a mixture of things. It's maybe they didn't ask, or
ask for what?
I think obviously death. I think death's obviously inevitable. Eventually, a very good person can die in an earthquake. It's like we're not supposed to live forever.
Oh, so you would say that, like death isn't that bad?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
suffering's negated by the fact that you get to spend eternity somewhere in heaven?
Well, suffering negated. I don't think that suffering is a bad thing.
Oh, so Jesus' suffering wasn't that bad?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
This
the
is like
intent of the people.
had a bad weekend, basically.
No, I'm just saying that suffering isn't a bad thing.
Oh, so shit. What happened to Jesus wasn't bad then?
Yeah.
Well, what's bad is the intents, or is the intention of the people that are mistreating someone.
Okay, so the intent of the person making others suffer is what matters, which means God's intention of making people suffer is the bad part.
Well, yeah. So yeah, making someone. I think
that's the right answer. Yeah,
suffer is bad.
Yeah, God's intent to make humanity suffer is bad. I agree.
Yeah.
That's why
what he did
if I
to
was
Job
God, I would have
super
done it
bad,
differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, holy shit. We didn't even get to Job, but God legitimately forced this man and all these other people to suffer just to like win a bet with Satan, which is weird for an all-knowing being.
He has a lot of pride for this all good being.
Well, listen, we got a couple people waiting to get in still yet, and we've been talking for like 45 minutes. And I mean, listen, we could probably talk for another hour, but I want to make sure we get to all the guests. So we appreciate you coming up and talking with us, Adam, and call back again soon.